report.
Tonight, the High Court explains why it ordered the release of more than 100 foreigners in immigration detention, including murderers and rapists, but has it just put the government in even deeper trouble? Plus warning, plans for carbon passports to cut your foreign travel. To save the planet, you know. Yet meanwhile, another foreign junket, not by the Prime Minister this time, but Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen is off to the biggest conference of global warming hypocrites you have ever seen. Plus Bruce Lehrmann monstered in the witness box as he sues over reports that he raped Brittany Higgins. But what does his torrid time really prove? Also tonight, how to trigger an ABC audience. Say that you're a liberal. Why the ABC's left-wing audience went feral when this smart schoolgirl appeared on Q&A last night. I'll ask her what she makes of the abuse. But first, you know how it is. Voters can say what they like, but the political class will still find a way most times to make your say count for nothing. I'll give you an example. 6 weeks ago, Australians voted no to the Voice, an Aboriginal-only advisory parliament written into our constitution. It was a decisive no too, 60%. And anyone who followed that debate honestly will know that the key issue here was that Australians did not want to be divided by race. That was the big message. Yet the Prime Minister still won't hear it. He's still twisting like a lawyer, saying, well, you know, you voted against the Voice, but not against the treaty, not against truth-telling, which means, in fact, truth-telling, propaganda, really, about our wicked past. It's not truth at all.
Will the Prime Minister confirm the Albanese Labor government still remains committed to implementing treaty and truth-telling?
We respect the outcome that was made on October the 14th. Prior to October the 14th, I stood at this dispatch box and they were trying to say that what people were voting on was treaty. They might recall that. That's right. And I indicated at this dispatch box that that wasn't what people were voting on, that indeed treaty negotiations are underway at state level.
And Labor Senator Pat Dodson today, in saying he was quitting Parliament, also refused to believe Australians really knew what they were doing when they voted against the Voice.
Many Australians of goodwill possibly didn't know the implications and the complexities of what the provision was about.
And sure enough, by hook or by crook, that whole Uluru Statement from the Heart agenda of racial division is still going ahead, along with that agenda of propaganda for the cause, the truth-telling. And at what cost, by the way? The Victorian government, you know, that's woke central, has just said it's giving a huge park along Mary Creek to people who identify as the traditional owners. And the creek, of course, will be renamed. Now, just why even more of Australia should be given to such groups centuries after British settlement is becoming harder and harder to understand, particularly with increasing intermarriage. I mean, who really is Aboriginal? But to that other part of Labor's agenda to divide us by race, the supposed truth-telling, creating even a kind of commission of truth, isn't that ominous, called the Makarrata, which the Albanese government is already spending $900,000 to set up. Now, Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney last week said she's still keen on this supposed truth-telling.
In particular, I'm hearing the importance of truth-telling. I am not saying I've got a model in my mind, but I am saying that what I'm hearing very clearly from Aboriginal communities is the importance of truth-telling.
Now, this truth-telling is a con. Burney does not want the truth at all. I mean, if she was interested in the truth, she would say, actually, the stolen generation? Truth is that our courts have not found one single case of racist officials stealing Aboriginal children just for being Aboriginal. Not a single one. She would also not be promoting the fake history of fake Aborigine Bruce Pascoe, who claims that Aborigines weren't really hunter-gatherers, but farmers living in houses, in towns of 1,000 people. Yet Burney actually recommended that children read his debunked book, Dark Emu.
The book that I recommend above everything else is called Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. It is revolutionary and easy to read. It's not a very long book, but it really turns on its head the notion that Aboriginal people were hunters and gatherers and that was about it. So I'd recommend that.
Now, I mentioned Pascoe and the fraud of this truth-telling because at our top journalism awards last week, the Walkleys, best documentary went to The Dark Emu Story. And that's a film commissioned by the ABC, funded by you taxpayers, that defends Pascoe and his fake history, which, by the way, is now taught in schools. I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, you haven't even had Victoria's version of The Voice, the first People's Assembly, celebrating, congratulations to Bruce Pascoe. And it said, the documentary explores the impact of Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu, a bombshell work that challenged Australia to rethink its history and start a new conversation. Well, that's absolutely false. It didn't make us rethink our history. It made us invent a completely new and fraudulent one. Because what's going on here is like organised, government-funded lying, a conspiracy against truth to the public to push a very divisive racial agenda. Now, I've fact-checked this award-winning so-called documentary before. Here's just a taste of what is meant now by truth-telling. Now, this Dark Emu story, this documentary, refused to admit Pascoe is not Aboriginal. It refused to show his genealogical records. He's 100% English descendant, right? 100% of his ancestors English. Far from questioning that, it sort of promoted it.
My name's Bruce Pascoe. I'm Ewan Bunurong, Tasmanian man.
Elders have said that they know who he is and they accept him as Aboriginal.
In fact, two Aboriginal groups say Pascoe is a fake, is not a member of their tribe as he claims. But that was not mentioned in this film. No, it's smeared me instead for doubting Pascoe. Now, this documentary also refused to detail how Pascoe invented evidence for Dark Emu. And I mean invented, to falsely claim that Aborigines weren't mere hunter-gatherers, but in fact farmers living in towns. In fact, the film went further, showing someone claiming Aborigines were the world's first astronomers and the world's first engineers, even architects as well, building this simple fish trap of rocks in a river built who knows actually when.
Our people, they designed the fish traps, which makes us architects.
I would describe the fish traps as the oldest human-made structure in the world. Older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than Stonehenge.
And this now Walkley Award-winning documentary treated the most ludicrous propaganda as true.
Indigenous knowledge systems are now understood to be the equivalent of the Western knowledge system.
I mean, seriously? Western and Aboriginal literature and philosophy and maths and medicine and engineering and chemistry and physics, it's all equivalent? I mean, seriously? The next time the journalists who run the Walkleys tell you they're in the truth business, laugh in their face. And Linda Burney, if Pascoe is your government standard for truth-telling, then your truth-telling is a fraud that's meant to divide us. Just what Australians voted against. Now, I'm seeing reports at the High Court today, this afternoon, through the Albanese government to Lifeline. A hint on how it could fix this mess of the 138 immigration detainees have now been released into the community, including murderers and rapists and a pedophile. Well, not so fast. In fact, before we even get to that judgment, there's a problem already. As I said last night, the government has now somehow lost one of those detainees that are released into the community with no controls. And today they still can't find him.
Can the Minister inform the House of the nature of this individual's crimes? And does the Minister know where this individual is now?
This government does not comment on operational or individual matters. The Australian community should be assured that all efforts coordinated under Operation Aegis are being made to track down this individual.
Oh, we've trained very hard. Joining me is the man who asked that question, the opposition's immigration spokesman, Dan Tehan. Dan, great to see you. How can the government lose one of those detainees so very fast? And do you buy the excuse you got today, well, we can't let you know who he is, we can't let you know what is done?
No, I don't, Andrew, and it is a very good question. I don't know how they've lost this detainee. You'll remember when they said they released them all, they put all these so-called strict requirements in place. Well, they've lost one of them and they won't tell us who it is, what they did or where they might be. And you'd think the best way to try and find that individual would be actually to put information out about him so the community could help in that fact. And we also found out today, which just goes to the complete incompetence of the handling of this, from a Al Jazeera report that the Malaysian man who you'll remember was part of killing that pregnant woman and then blowing her body up. It was reported today that that individual, when they were released, didn't have any requirements put on them for at least the first 2 days that they were out. So the more we find out about the government's handling of this, the more it just beggars belief.
And he's only an assassin, so why should we worry about him wandering our streets? And now to the High Court decision. It is rushed out its full reasons now for forcing the government to release these detainees. The government released them without any restrictions on where they were going, which was a bit stupid. But despite early reports, Dan Tehan, the full decisions don't seem to me a big help at all. It says the government can't decide for itself to hold indefinitely, in this case, the Burmese pedophile who took this case to court. It couldn't hold him indefinitely when no other country would take him. But it said, and this was supposedly the lifeline, the government could put this pedophile back in detention under, say, a new law for the preventative detention of a child sex offender who presents an unacceptable risk of reoffending for release. But isn't this just a ruling for one of the 138 detainees? How many of the others could be said to also pose an unacceptable risk of danger, and all you need to do is pass a law to put them back in jail or detention?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Andrew. And the first thing I'd say is there's actually 141 detainees now out in the community. 3 of those don't seem to be having any monitoring whatsoever, which seems to have been a decision of the government's making. We don't know what's happened to those 3 and why that decision was taken. You've then got the other 6, 4 of whom have refused to have the ankle bracelets, one of whom they can't find. So there is 141 we're dealing with. What the High Court has said, though, is that if there was real prospects that they could be removed from the country, then they can be detained. Now, what we need to hear from the government is, have they done due diligence on these people before they release them? Are there real prospects, at least among some of them, that they could be removed from the country? And therefore, are they going to re-detain them and start again the process of removing them from the country? Because it would seem to me there's got to be at least some real prospects amongst those 141 that they could be removed from the country. So that's what they should be focused on, as well as putting the preventative detention regime in place that the High Court has said they could put in place, that we've been arguing they needed to put in place. So for those real serious offenders, like the child sex offenders, who there's a danger that they could do harm in the community, that you can use a preventative detention order to be able to make sure that the community is safe and they are in detention. So there are a number of things here, a number of steps that the government can take, and yet once again we're just hearing nothing from the government apart from the fact that they're talking about they might move on some sort of legislative process, but it's not clear at all what they're going to do. But there is no reason why they shouldn't be re-looking at those 141 again, seeing whether there's real prospects of them being removed from the country, re-detaining them and doing it.
Well, you can't re-detain them unless you do find now, under this judgment as I see it, they're an unacceptable risk of danger. And if there is an imminent prospect in each particular case of them being accepted by somewhere else, and I would think this applies to only a handful now of those people out there. So I don't see the lifeline necessarily. But Dan Tehan, this is costing us, it seems to me, real, we're looking like fools. We actually had the government so worried that this Burmese pedophile would get a decision in his favour in the High Court that they frantically shopped around in America, begging the Americans to will you take a Burmese pedophile off our hands? Would you accept him into American stead during the Prime Minister's visit there? I mean, how pathetic. What must the Americans think of Australians when the big favour they're trying to call in is, will you take a pedophile from us?
Well, it gets worse because it seems on the 30th of May that the Minister of Immigration, Andrew Giles, or his department, with the sign-off from the Minister, we would assume, said to the High Court that we do not think there is a reasonable prospect that we can remove this individual from Australia. So he basically, Bell the cat, gave the game away in the actual case, which then led to the High Court making the decision that it did. And the reason the government then scrambled, it seems, is because someone woke up to the fact that Minister Giles had made this horrible, horrible error, and then they scrambled to try and fix it. But of course, it was too late. So the more we look at this, the more of a mess it is.
Well, it is, but I just think how diplomatically stupid to exploit the Prime Minister's visit to try and get America to accept a pedophile when we've got big defence issues on our plate and favours to ask for there. Dan Tehan, thank you so much for your time. This really makes Australia look so stupid, really. But I tell you what makes us look even sicker overseas is this explosion of Jew hatred in Australia. It's shamed us. But at least today, more than 600 high-profile leaders of business, the media, the law, universities, have published in our newspapers one of those rare joint letters that I think are worth something, calling out this anti-Semitism very directly. Now, who signed the letter? That's, of course, interesting. Include 19 former state premiers like Jeff Kennett, Daniel Andrews, actually, Gladys Berejiklian, Anna Bligh, media bosses, of course, like my own Lachlan Murdoch, our boss here, News Corporation Australia boss Michael Miller, and many others. But who didn't sign it could be even more interesting. I didn't see one leader of a big bank there. None. On The Voice, they've been very noisy on this. What's that about? Scared of offending customers? Or didn't get asked? I don't know. Joining me from Israel, where he is visiting, is Jeremy Liebler, President of the Zionist Federation of Australia. Jeremy, great to catch up with you again, even if the subject matter is not great. Not one big boss, bank boss, signed this joint letter. Are you disappointed?
Oh, look, Andrew, I'm very pleased with the letter. It was an important statement. It's, on the one hand, a little bizarre that it was required, given there really is not anything particularly controversial in the letter. It shouldn't be controversial to condemn anti-Semitism. I think it was a very powerful grassroots initiative of a group of business leaders. So I wouldn't want to draw too many conclusions from the absence of a signature or not, that they may or may not have been asked. And from what I understand, there is still an opportunity for many to sign up on the website and add their name to the list. And from what I've heard, there are already up to 9,000 that have signed that statement since it was released this morning.
Well, to better news, I think. The prisoner swap between Israel and the Hamas terrorist group that runs Gaza. Look, it did finish after 4 days. Hamas released 50 of the Jewish hostages, women and children, in exchange for 150 Palestinian criminals, including terrorists, in Israeli jails. Now there's going to be 2 more days of truce and prisoner swaps. 20 more Jewish hostages, 60 more Palestinian criminals. Fantastic news, especially for the families. But it does come with a risk to Israel's army in Gaza, doesn't it? 6 days of truce in all now, 6 days of Hamas preparing defences.
As I landed in Tel Aviv, there was news of the truce had been announced. This was just late last week. and walking around the streets of Israel and meeting people, need to appreciate that every child being held hostage feels like they are the child of all the people of Israel, both Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis, I should say as well. And same with every son, every daughter, every parent, every grandparent. And you can see the anxiety on everyone's faces, because I think this country understands probably better than anyone else what a difficult conundrum they are in. On the one hand, everyone deeply, desperately wants to bring back the hostages. It's one of the core priorities of the IDF's mission in Gaza. But at the same time, they're conscious that there is a very significant price to pay. These people being released, contrary to the way in which some media outlets have described them as children, these are people that have attempted murder on innocent Israelis, stabbings, suicide bombings. The only difference is that they failed. So these are very serious terrorists being released now into the public. And there's a real trade-off here for the people of Israel. But the priority is to secure the release of these hostages, because fundamentally Israel values life.
Well, you mentioned the children. One chilling detail there. I note that Hamas still has not freed a mother and her 2 children, the youngest hostage, in fact, just the baby. Apparently because some other terrorist group has bought the hostages, is now holding them. Jeremy Liebler, that strikes me as extremely ominous.
Deeply, deeply concerning. The psychological warfare that has been deployed by Hamas in the course of these hostage release, knowing how every Israeli is sitting on the edge of their chair waiting for these hostages to be released, is incredibly, incredibly traumatic for the entire country. There was also at one point the Qatari Prime Minister announced that the truce may not be extended because 40 of the additional women and children being held by Hamas, Hamas don't actually know where they are at the moment, because they're being held by other civilians that took them into Gaza. And I think this is part of the story that people don't quite understand. After Hamas initially breached the border and committed the atrocities, there were many, many hours where hundreds of Gazan civilians crossed the border. They participated in the murders, they participated in the rapes. And then after they did so, they looted the homes of the people that they murdered. They stole children's bicycles. There is video evidence of this. And now we see that these civilians are holding some of these hostages. I don't know what other society exists today where ordinary civilians participate in the kidnapping of women and children.
Look, it's a shocking, shocking story, and you haven't even detailed something I guess we don't really want to talk about much, and that is, in fact, some of the hostages could, in fact, be dead, more than the 3 or 4 we've been told so far. Jeremy Liebler, thank you so much indeed for making time for us. Before the break, there was a moment in Parliament today that moved me. And I think all of you would probably want to hear about it. If you didn't hear what actually happened, let me show you some of it. A week and a half ago, Charlie, was the youngest son of South Australia's top policeman, Grant Stevens. He was killed in an alleged hit and run. He was the 101st road fatality in South Australia this year. Now, Commissioner Stevens, despite this unimaginable loss, then wrote an open letter about his son to make sure he wasn't just known as number 101, the 101st fatality, to plead again for people to take care on the roads. It's been a mission of his for ages. God knows that he ever thought that he might be the personal face of it. Well, Opposition Leader Pete Dutton last week had promised to read out this letter in Parliament today. And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, to his credit, helped him to do that in question time by offering him time. He's supposed to just answer questions himself, but he offered Peter Dutton time in question time to, yes, read out that letter.
Last week, a great many Australians read the extraordinary open letter from South Australian Police Commissioner Grant Stevens and his wife Emma about their youngest son, Charlie. In their words, a lovable ratbag from the moment he could talk. Tragically, it was a letter in which Charlie's parents laid bare their broken hearts. Just hours after Commissioner Stevens addressed the state about the tragic shooting death of police officer Jason Doig, he and Emma received the news no parent ever wants to get. Charlie had been the victim of an alleged hit-and-run incident.
101 is Charles Hinchcliffe Stevens. As the Prime Minister pointed out before, Charlie boy, Chaz, Lynx, Steve. You loved life and gave so much to so many. You're a force of nature, and we'll never forget your beautiful, cheeky, disarming smile.
Moments like that, you realise the truth of that line in the poem, that no man is an island. It affects us all. For God's sake, take care out there. After the break, a plan for carbon passports, meaning you can only fly so far. Are you okay with that? Meanwhile, Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen and 70,000 other global warming believers will fly this week to Dubai. To tell you why you should worry, we'll come back after this. Now, Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, has been getting a lot of grief for his foreign travel, but the trip that I'm probably worried most about is the one that Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen is going on this week to Dubai, to a dangerous but also farcical conference there that starts on Thursday. Now, let me explain why perhaps you should worry too. Bowen, as you know, is a global warming zealot who actually just got another smack of reality today. A reality check. Bowen is trying to stop us using reliable coal-fired electricity. As you know, he wants us to use lots and lots more wind and solar instead, and claims this is going to save you money.
Renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, and that includes when you include and count transmission and storage.
Yet your bills keep going up. And today, the head of our biggest energy producer, AGL, called out this total fantasy that Bowen is pushing, saying, well, actually, there's a bit of a misunderstanding at the moment where people say renewables will be cheaper and that will lead to cheaper generation costs. That's wrong. In the short term and the medium term, this will lead to higher costs. So Bowen is saying renewables are the cheapest and it's going to save you money. The guy who actually makes your electricity says, well, no, it will cost more. Who's telling the truth? Check your bills over the year. You'll find out who's been conning you. And that's the thing with this government, you know, it's so carried away with the ideology that the facts just don't seem to count. And so to this meeting in Dubai on Thursday, Bowen is off there to this latest big global warming conference called by the United Nations. These things, these meetings, annual, they're like a mass worship of the climate gods. And this one is the most over-the-top one yet. Guess how many people are flying there to tell each other that yes, renewables are good, yes, the planet is in crisis, and yes, people should cut emissions, maybe fly less, for instance. Maybe even have carbon passports with a limit on just how often they could fly. So how many did you think are flying to this conference in Dubai? Try 70,000, which is about double the number that have gone to any previous UN global warming conferences. 70,000. It's an industry. And what a pack of total hypocrites. Joining me is the Tuesday panel, Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator Australia on politics and culture. And on his debut, Alexander Volz, contributor to skynews.com.au, writer for The Spectator, and also, as it happens, a fine composer. Now, Will Kingston, 70,000 people flying to a conference in Dubai to work out ways to make the rest of us cut emissions. It sounds like an elaborate and stupid joke, but is it?
It is. It's interesting how virtual conferencing hasn't taken off amongst the climate crusading community, Andrew. I've actually done several virtual conferences over my career, and here's the thing. You can share information just as well. You can still make agreements. You can network to some extent, What you can't do is you can't hobnob with the global great and the good, and the social media posts don't look quite as sexy. And that's the thing. This is all about demonstrating your status amongst the global elite. This is all about being in the vicinity of Bill Gates. This is all about the show. This is all for show. And unfortunately, if this was really about saving the planet, this stuff would all be done on Zoom.
Alexander Fold, 70,000 people. How can you possibly justify that? If they all got to speak for a minute, you'd be there for ages.
Well, you certainly would, Andrew. And, you know, you've got to, I'm sure they're arguing it to themselves, that they've got to go over this first time. And we're still in the planning stages before we really cut down on all these emissions. No, I totally and utterly agree with what Will said. Hi, Will. Great to see you. And great to be on, Andrew, as well. It's just a colossal hypocritic move. So, you know, 70,000 people, I mean, that's more than most football games. Heavens above! I mean, what are these ideologues up to? This whole net zero push, Andrew. I mean, this is not the national project that Australia needs. Forget about it as an international issue. It's not the national project that Australia needs. We shouldn't be sending our politicians over there to discuss these sorts of things that are, in fact, causing most of the issues that we have in this country economically, and some might even say culturally and educatively at the moment. So, no, 70,000, you know, stay home, guys, do it over Zoom, and maybe even find something better to do with your time.
Well, like I say, it's a suggestion that it's an industry now. But, Will, you know what I find amazing? I mentioned that the head of our biggest power company, right, he directly contradicts the government's big line, you know. He says, no, renewable energy is not cheaper. Costs will go up, not down. And it's almost ignored. I mean, the only way I got to hear about that quote, that it's actually more expensive, was literally the very last paragraph of one story in one newspaper, the Climate Change Crusading Sydney Morning Herald. The very last paragraph. At what stage do you think journalists of the left will fact-check the government on this claim and accept that renewables are too expensive and this revolution is a con?
Andrew, I don't think they will. I think the way that you phrased it in your intro, that this is about a quasi-religion, was right. And something which is a quasi-religion means that you don't actually really bother to look into the facts. But here's the thing. People can see their energy bills every week. They're not stupid, and they are feeling it in the hip pocket more and more. And so what you're seeing is just an increasing disconnect between the people who have to pay the energy bills and the people who are reporting on it and the people who should be regulating to make their energy bills cheaper. Unfortunately, this is just leading to that increased disconnect between the elites of our society and the people who are really struggling day to day to make ends meet.
Well, absolutely right. And then you get an academic pushing this case in the taxpayer-funded website, The Conversation, for a carbon passport to limit how far you can fly. So 70,000 people can go to Dubai to just sit there and have a jamboree. But carbon passports, I mean, ideas like this, what do you reckon, Alexander? Is this going to take off, so to speak?
Well, I certainly hope not, Andrew. You know, I would be interested in asking the question, who's going to have jurisdiction over a carbon passport? Is it going to be the Commonwealth or is it going to be Davos? That would be something that I'd be very interested in working out. You know, you can't keep curbing the liberties of the Australian people for these ideological reasons. They're not grounded in any sort of science or pragmatism. They're totally and utterly ideological. This is the textbook stuff of neo-Marxism. And back to your point about the journalists, one question that we should seriously be asking ourselves is how many of these journalists and how many of the corporations of these journalists have shares in renewable energy? I mean, is it time that we need to look at re-evaluating the code of ethics or whatever it is that the journalists follow to see if they do in fact need to declare their share interests? Politicians certainly do. So I don't know. I think that that's a practical measure that could be taken that would actually yield some good benefits for us all and would get to the heart of inaccurate and biased reporting.
I tell you what, Will, the sort of superstructure that would be needed to monitor a carbon passport, the level of interference and interrogation of your private life, the public service looking at where you're going and for what reason, etc., etc. I mean, these academics don't consider the kind of state that would do that. It'd have to be like a China kind of thing. But meanwhile, back in, you know, once these guys come back from their luxury conference in Dubai and back to Struggle Street, Australia, when Chris Bowen finally comes back, more news of the economy is slowing down. People are doing it tough, especially if you've got a small business. Retail sales plummeted from an increase in September, 0.9%, to a fall of 0.2% last month, with only food sales up. That's a necessity. Everything else going down. They were told in part this is because consumers are waiting for this month's sales, the Black Friday ones and all that. But doesn't it seem the wrong time to be talking about hitting Australians with even tougher global warming policies when you get, you know, people like Australians really doing it tough like this?
I'll take that one, Andrew.
I would certainly say so.
Oh, I meant that, Will. Sorry. Yes, go.
No, let me out this one because I think it's outrageous. The fact of the matter is, who is advising this government? If you are intelligently trying to advise a government, what you'll say is we've got one priority, cost of living, and every one of our departments in their own little way going to try and make sure that we are addressing that problem. The Voice, all of the climate stuff just seems to indicate that this is a government that doesn't have its priorities right. 12 months ago, I certainly didn't think that Albo would be a one-term Prime Minister. I'm increasingly thinking that despite how unusual that would be historically, is it real risk here because people are hurting and they don't seem to have their eye on the ball.
I suspect you could be very right. I mean, it's only halfway through. Just quickly before we go, Alexander, I spoke about this last night, but as we get closer to the release date, the revelations of the latest muckraking book on the royals are getting even crazier. Omid Scobie is close to Meghan Markle, which makes him a parasite on a parasite. Today claims he knows the identity of the racist. In fact, the two racist royals supposedly commented on the colour of the skin of her first child. And he's also attacked Kate, the Princess of Wales, calling her cold. You're with the Australian Monarchist League, Alexander. Is this going to damage the royals?
Well, I'm inclined to think not, Andrew. I mean, I always go back to that great quote by C.S. Lewis that he wrote in the 1948 copy of The Spectator, which says, monarchy can easily be debunked. But then he goes on to say, but watch the faces and mark well the debunkers. And who is Omid Scobie? As far as I can tell, no one had heard of him before he became a mouthpiece for Meghan Markle. He's attacking, you know, one of the most popular royals in the royal family, the Princess of Wales. I think that this is all just surface tabloid distraction. As far as Australians go, Andrew, don't worry about it. You know, don't worry about it. It's going to take more than a sixth-rate journalist to take down Australia's system of constitutional monarchy.
So true. Will Kingston, Alexander Volz, thank you both. Well, dearie me. After the break, I'm going to talk to the schoolgirl who got ABC viewers last night furious by making such sense. I saw on Twitter today astonishing abuse from ABC viewers from the supposedly more tolerant side of politics. What enraged them was a young woman they saw in the audience of the ABC's Q&A show, someone they claimed was nauseating, was deluded, who was reactionary, who was smarmy and self-entitled, and so bad that one woman threw a shoe at the TV at this girl from a private school. Makes you wonder what kind of vile audience the ABC has been cultivating over the years. I mean, what little monsters they are. Now, I actually checked what they were fuming at and discovered, in fact, a young woman from a state school, not private, who is smart, articulate, serious, thoughtful. See if you agree. This is what set off those ABC leftists.
Yeah, well, I'm a grade 11 public high school student, and, you know, recently especially, it's become pretty clear to me that one side of the political sphere is pushing a bit of an agenda within schools. And, you know, when this started happening, I thought, okay, I'm going to evaluate all the parties, see what they have to discuss, to offer, and it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that my values aligned with the Liberal Party, and that was because of two main reasons. The first one, the Liberal Party's dedication to equal opportunity for a diverse Australia. My mum, she's an immigrant. I've witnessed her immigrant story, and this is definitely true and really important to me. And equally so, Liberals, belief that the family environment is most effective to allow us to reach our full potential.
Well, joining me is that Year 11 student, Chloe McCormick. Chloe, thank you very much for coming on the show, and congratulations. I thought you spoke brilliantly last night. I wish I'd had that self-possession myself at your age, but I guess that's why the Twitter mob is so cross with you. I hope you realise that. You're getting attacked because you did so well.
No, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that. And, it's funny, you mentioned before how people were attacking me saying, oh, she's a privileged, she's entitled, she's a private school girl. No, I'm very proudly public educated. And I think the trolls that we saw, they actually reiterate why I wanted to come out, be on live television now 2 nights in a row saying, I'm a Liberal and I'm really proud about it.
Well, good on you. I mean, a lot of people shrink into their shell because of the abuse. That's why it works too often, I think. You said a couple of things last night I want to ask you about. You suggested one side of the political agenda, and I don't need any prizes for guessing which, had been pushed at school particularly recently. What did you mean?
Yeah, well, I know for myself and for a lot of my friends, we go to lots of different types of schools, whether that be regional, city, public, private. We've noticed that a few teachers within our schools, they're starting to push a bit of their political ideas. And for me, an example that was really obvious was actually during the federal election last year. In class, a comment was made saying that only one of the parties actually even considered fighting against climate change. And for me, I was very sceptical because I know the Liberal Party, they're dedicated to securing our natural heritage, our natural environment, and especially as well, for me, I'm a young Liberal, I have my values aligned with the Liberal Party, but as well as that, I'm really passionate about climate action. I run my own organisation called Code Green, where I go into the community and I teach young children about coding and climate change. So I'm actively working in that area. And so for me, this obviously seems like a bit of a contradiction and raises the question for me that should teachers in schools be influencing students politically?
Well, that's a very good question, particularly when I see the New South Wales Teachers Union, some of the people there telling teachers to go into the class with their cuffliers on to support Palestine in front of their children, their students, some of whom could be Jewish. I think it's the most disgraceful thing that they're considering, but there you go. Just finally, being a Liberal in Year 11, it strikes me that could be rather hard. Are you lonely in that? Because younger people, of course, are more likely to be of the left until they come against reality, of course.
Well, I think it's really interesting. For me personally, I choose my friendships. I don't look at politics. I look at, what teenagers, we like our sports, our school, going out, dancing, singing. So that's how I choose my friendships. I don't doubt, I definitely hope that I have friends that I'm politically aligned with, but I recognise that I probably have a lot that I'm not. And so what I really hope is that, especially now, 2 nights in a row, I've gone out on live television, I've said that I'm a young Liberal. I hope I'm able to sit down with these friends that I have differing views with. We can sit down, actually have a constructive conversation, and hopefully find some middle ground. And I think if we're able to do that now, at our age as teenagers, I think that could be a really positive future for us, because no matter which government is in power, we need collaboration from both sides. That's when we're going to see real great change.
Chloe McCormick, let me know how well that goes, whether the blowback is a little worse than you might have expected, but let's see. We need to know how to disagree with each other. That's the biggest thing now, I think one of the biggest challenges in this country. Thank you so much for your time and for your courage. Appreciate it. After the break, a tough time in the witness box for Bruce Lehrmann, but does that mean it was wrong to call out the witch hunt against him in the Brittany Higgins rape case? Plus, how Jews have been betrayed by the left that many assumed would be their allies. Bruce Lehrmann is sure having a tough time in the witness box. He's the man suing Channel 10 for defamation for all but naming him before his trial last year as the man who allegedly raped Brittany Higgins, a fellow Liberal staffer in Parliament House, after a drunken night out. Lehrmann strongly denies it. His criminal trial last year was eventually aborted for jury misconduct. Higgins back then was found out having said things that weren't true. But this time it's Lehrman under the pump, admitting he took cocaine, admitting he'd lied to his boss at the time about his whereabouts, admitting he gave conflicting excuses back then for why he was going back to Parliament House with Higgins so late. And now the Australian newspaper, which has run lots of articles on how journalists, politicians and a prosecutor were destroying his chances of a fair trial, ran this video of Lehrman celebrating after that trial was called off.
I broke the law and Bruce won. Bruce won.
Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, editor of the Spectator Australian, host of Outsiders here on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. Rowan, I see prominent figures on the left loving this, but suggesting also people on the Australian who called out the unfairness of Lehrman's trial by media, ha, ha, ha. I did that as well, call it out. They're missing the point here, aren't they?
They certainly are. As a Clash fan, by the way, a good choice of song there. I certainly might have been known on the odd occasion to have a glass of wine and sing along loudly to some 70s rock music, but it's got to be 70s rock music, Andrew, always. But on a more serious note, there will be one day a mini-series or a Netflix series or a big book or whatever about the entire Brittany Higgins, Bruce Lehrman saga, and I hope it's called Due Process or Presumption of Innocence or something like that, because what we have learned over how many years is it now this thing has been going on? What we have learned is that due process is so critical to the rule of law, and we have due process for a very, very good reason. And we have seen the abandonment of due process and sensible legal processes time and time again throughout this entire saga. So it's worth remembering, first of all, there will be people leaping up and down and going, oh, Bruce Lehrman said this or that in the witness box or whatever. A couple of things to remember. First of all, Bruce Lehrman's in the witness box at the moment. Brittany Higgins will be in the witness box soon. And then I'm sure there will be a whole other saga about, well, do we believe her, or did she say this, or did she say whatever? All of which kind of misses the point, because this is a defamation trial. And I know it's easy to blur the two things, but this is not a trial about whether Bruce Lehrman is guilty of rape. This is a trial about whether Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson are guilty of defamation. Now, of course, you can draw whatever conclusions from the conclusion of the trial, but that's to miss the point. The point here is that the law must follow its own proper processes, and that did not happen in the trial where we were supposed to find out whether a rape occurred or did not.
I said from the very start, I don't know which of them is telling the truth, but I don't want it decided by trial by media, which is what we were getting. This is the point.
Precisely.
Not guilt and all that. I'll leave that for this court to decide as well. It's not that. It's about witch hunts. But Rowan, speaking of witch hunts, the Jew hatred in Australia, it's particularly shocked Jews, I know, of the left, politicians, activists. They're feeling betrayed, and I think that's because they've been naive. The Jewish intelligentsia had traditionally been to the left and assumed the left would save them from the anti-Semites of the far right. Hasn't worked out this way, Rowan.
Precisely, Andrew. And as you know, this has been a kind of point I, for one, have been trying to make for many years since Donald Trump came into power, from when Tony Abbott was in power. I've repeatedly told many well-meaning Jewish organizations or bodies or groups, whatever it might be, that the days of Jews having their best friends on the left, the traditional left side of politics, are well and truly behind us. And although I hate the terms left and right, I'm just using them for convenience sake. There are many on the left, increasingly and tragically, the progressive left in particular, as opposed to the traditional left. There are many on the progressive left who are no friends of Jews and no friends of Israel. And it's all to do with the basic philosophy, neo-Marxist, oppressor versus oppressor, etc., blah, 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 all the undergraduate rubbish that they all learn in our rather ghastly universities. But the point here, Andrew, is that we have seen such demonizing of Jews and hatred of Jews in the light of October 7th, which just terrifies and shocks me to the core, because one would have thought after October 7th and the appalling massacres, any person with any decency would simply be offering their love and support to the Jewish community here and abroad, and putting the political issues to another day. Sorry, Andrew?
Yep, absolutely correct, Rowan. The far right, they don't actually control the ABC or the Sydney Morning Herald or whatever. Thank you for your time. Coming up now, the special documentary, What Really Happened in Wuhan. The next chapter, the next phase of Sherry Marks's in-depth reporting into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and high-level cover-ups.